Hello, everyone. We are back with another live workshop today. Oh, and who am I? I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Diana Mayfield, and I'm the head of content here at Design Files. And today we are joined by Justine Clay, business coach for creative freelancers and entrepreneurs. We are going to learn strategies that work for designers with ADHD and other forms of neurodivergence. And I'm really excited to dive into today's topic. Welcome, Justine.
Hello, thank you for having me. I just suddenly realized I want to put up my desk, so I'm standing. I feel like my energy is all different when I'm standing up.
I know. I have a standing desk too, but it's often sitting. I don't know. Something's wrong with my desk. It just doesn't,
It doesn't
it's the desk's fault. It's the desk's fault. I know I'm the one that needs to push the button. I need to push the button and get it going up, but
Stupid desk.
I don't do that enough. So, okay, you're going to inspire me. I'm going to do that later today.
Excellent.
Not now. No, I'm just kidding. Okay. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us. So where are you located?
I'm located in northern New Jersey.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Where are you located? You're on the West Coast?
I'm in Monterey, California, so a couple hours south of San Francisco. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
Really pretty. Cool. So we're both by the ocean.
That's right.
Yeah. So I'm going to let you just jump right in, get into the good stuff. So Justine is going to share her screen and present. And guys, as you're watching, always feel free to drop questions into the comments as you think of them. So then we can have some things to discuss when we get to Q&A. So with that said, Justine, you can take it away.
Great. You can see my screen, right?
You can see your screen. Yes, you're good.
Beautiful. Okay, wonderful. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Business Strategies for ADHD Creatives. I am a business coach and an ADHD life coach, and my name is Justine Clay, and I'm delighted to be here with you all. As a business coach, I work with all kinds of creative entrepreneurs and freelancers, including interior designers and branding specialists and all across the board. And because many of my clients are creative and entrepreneurs, guess what? There's a big section of folks who are neurodivergent. It tends to come with the territory. So hence me being a life coach, an ADHD coach also. So what I've learned along the way, having been a coach since 2010 and having been an agent before that, I'll get into that a little bit more later, is that obviously the same strategies don't work for all brains. And when you have one person who is neurotypical and another person who is neurodivergent, there are so many spaces where things can kind of like fall in the gap or become misunderstood. And just running a business is just a lot, right? So I realized that a lot of the strategies that I used in coaching and consulting were not really that well suited for folks who are neurodivergent. So hence the certification, hence the specialty. And we're just going to jump into some stuff here. Thankfully, there's a lot of overlap, with what we all experience. Okay, so I would love to know, and I can't see the chat, so that's the one thing. So I'd like to just pose this question to you. What is ADHD to you? Is it a superpower, or is it kind of a pain in the ass? Or is it a little bit of both? Like I say, I can't see what the chat is. I know that when I usually ask this question, a lot of people say it depends on the day and a little bit of both, right? So, we've got a lot of, positives and challenges that come with any kind of like brain wiring, any neurocognitive style, right? So I wonder if you could share, and maybe you can just share it in the chat and you can all see it. I won't be able to see it, but you all can see it. What are some of the biggest myths about folks with ADHD? I learned a horrible statistic, a while back, that children who have ADHD receive 20,000 more negative comments before the age of 10 than neurotypical children. And, one of the things that like I have noticed as a neurotypical person is that we all have biases, right? And a lot of times the traits associated with ADHD are oftentimes kind of characterized as character traits rather than just brain chemistry, right? Brain wiring. So I'm imagining from past webinars, some of the things that maybe you're thinking are, or saying are that, like, some of the myths include that people are lazy, that they are flaky, that, are disorganized, that they leave everything till the last minute, right? A lot of these characterizations, don't pay attention, don't really care. And a lot of these things are things that, really become sort of internalized, right? So we want to first of all acknowledge these things so that we can divest from those ourselves, right? So here are some of the things that we do know about ADHD is that many of the traits that are typically associated with creative entrepreneurship also align beautifully with the traits of ADHD. So a few of those are idea generation. How many of you all could generate ideas, all day, every day, right? That's usually not the problem, right? Getting bored by, sort of like mundane tasks, things that you don't really, like I love the administrative stuff. That's just like really hard to kind of like get the motivation going, right? Even if like you should and you would rather get those things done, it's just like really hard to kind of get that dopamine that you need to motivate to do that stuff. The promise of something new, like novelty, is really a big dopamine producer, right? And a high tolerance for risk. I mean, we all need that in entrepreneurship, and a willingness to jump into that. And the other thing that we know, and I know this from being an agent representing and managing creatives on projects, to being a coach supporting creative entrepreneurs and building a profitable business, that bright, shiny object is real. What do I mean by bright, shiny object? It's like, oh, shiny, let me go over there, like a new idea, something exciting, right? That's always going to, sort of tear our attention away from, maybe the sort of the grunt work that is involved in making any real idea, actually happen to get that over the finish line, right? So we know all of these things, and those are things that, for sure we have some influence over, right? There are lots of ways in which we can work with, the brain chemistry and wiring that we have. And there are also sort of like, life approaches that we can take that are going to make things work more for us than against us. So I don't know if any of you have read James Clear's Atomic Habits. It's a fantastic book. And having been in communities, neurodiverse communities, meaning there are neurodivergent folks and neurotypical folks, I've found that this is one of those rare books on habits that both groups love equally, right? It's not like it just works for neurotypicals or it just is targeted to neurodivergent folks. So he says, look for situations where the energy is already flowing downhill. Invest in relationships where there is already mutual respect. Create products that tap into a desire that people already have. Work on projects that play to your strengths. I think that this quote really says a lot about why so many people go into business for themselves. So many folks with ADHD go into business for themselves, because you can have so much more autonomy over the products that you create, over the projects that will play to your strengths, to creating the conditions where the energy is already flowing downhill, right? And you get to choose who you work with. Like that goes a long way to creating those conditions. So just a little bit about me, a super quick introduction. I'm Justine Clay, and I am a business coach for creative professionals. I am a former agent for independent creatives. I was an agent for copywriters, art directors, creative directors, fashion illustrators in New York City for many years. I'm a certified ADHD coach, and I'm also neurotypical. Now, the reason why I came to this is that I have a child who has ADHD. Turns out later that we so strongly suspect that my husband also has it. And so I'm a part of a neurodiverse family. And, I really started to see the differences in how different brain wirings, just worked in everyday life and just in business. And so once I started to also notice that a lot of my clients also had ADHD, I realized, I wonder if I have an adequate toolkit to support everybody. And as I went through a year-long training program, it was really rigorous. I realized that I did not have the toolkit that I needed. Now it's much more robust, and I didn't have the understanding. So I do like to mention how a neurotypical person came to be coaching neurodivergent folks. And I also believe that embracing a growth mindset is the first step to overcoming any challenge. And I don't mean mindset in a woo-woo way, envision it and it'll come true or any of that stuff. I mean it in, the way that Carol S. Dweck from Stanford University meant that a growth mindset is which is something that we can absolutely cultivate, is when we look at a challenge as an opportunity for growth, rather than a fixed mindset, which is we don't try to do things that are outside of our comfort zone for fear of failing or looking stupid or whatever. Okay, so this really is the foundation of much of my work with folks, because if I can't shift someone's beliefs around something, then all of the tactics and tools and strategies in the world will not make any difference, right? We have to have a different belief first. So our beliefs give rise to our thoughts give rise to our actions. So just a quick nutshell version of the growth mindset there. So I'm just going to have a sip of water because I'm talking a mile a minute. I will also slow down a little bit, probably. It's normally at the beginning when I've got a little adrenaline going. All right, so what we're going to cover today, 3 sections. We're going to talk about what makes you unique, your unique value proposition. We're also going to talk about how to clarify who your ideal clients are. To that James Clear quote, work with people who already respect what you do and how you do it. And we're going to identify how you deliver those outstanding results that you do deliver. Now, at the end, I'm going to share a group coaching program that I have coming up. I do it twice a year. I'll just mention it at the very end, but I may reference some of the elements as we go through. So just to give you a heads up about that. That's that cohort starting in September. All right. So step 1. Oh, I've got a typo on my very first slide here. Who you are, why you're different, and why it matters. Excuse me, I go through all of these things, I feel like with a fine-tooth comb before I go live. And it's funny how you can look at the same slide again and again and again and not see the typo until you're live. But, that's show business, right? So who you are, why you're different, and why it matters. Because here's the thing. Most of us, what we do is not, break the mold unique, right? Like other people do what we do. They don't do it exactly the way we do it, which does matter, right? But still, it's there are going to be factors that are going to make someone choose us over someone else who does the same thing, right? And that's what we're going to be talking about here, how to identify those things. I love this quote from Maya Angelou. She says, success is liking yourself, liking what you do, and liking how you do it. And of all of my workshops, and I have several workshops that I have given over the years, the ADHD workshop is the only one where I include this slide, because what I was talking about earlier is like so much of that bias has been internalized, right? And so oftentimes if you've been told, you're always dropping balls, or like it's always last minute with you, or whatever it is you've been told over the years, right? That can turn into sort of an internal voice that isn't helpful, right? It's not helpful to achieving that growth mindset, to moving beyond whatever limitations we all work with, right? So this is the first step. So there are a couple of ways that I like to think about things like this, and how you can distinguish yourself. So there are two aspects. We're only going to talk about one of them today. There's the zone of genius work, and then are the values. Now, I'm not going to talk about values today, but I'll just touch on it really quickly. If you were to look at my website, it's JustineClay.com. You will see on my About section, there's a philosophy and values section. And that's really like why the sort of philosophy behind why I do what I do, and my process, and the kind of frameworks that I use, right? That's important because it helps other people understand before they even talk to me, before they consider working with me, to sort of figure out, are we on the same page? Do they think they'll like my process and how I think about what we're trying to do here? If my values and my philosophy were, if you're not scaling, you're dying, then, which is not what I think, to be clear, but what a lot of, especially, white male coaches will be saying as a business coach, a lot of people would not, they'd be turned off by that, right? So part of my philosophy is you're never behind, right? That's a very different philosophy. So that is going to help someone connect or not connect, right? Are they right for me? They're not. Values, I used Brené Brown's framework, which I love from, I think it's on my website, but I think it's in Dare to Lead, where you identify like the 3 to 4 values, of your business, and then what they look like in action. Those are on my website. So one of my values is integrity. I talk about what that looks like in action, right? So it's real. It's not just pretty words, right? That it actually sort of shows how I walk those values, how I talk those values, all right? So that's just a little word on that, but I didn't want to take us through a whole exercise just for time. But zone of genius activities, I want to get into that because there are some things that all of us naturally do really well. And of course, we work on those things and we gain deeper mastery on those things, but there is a natural area of genius for us, right? And it's going to be different for each person. This comes from Gay Hendricks, The Big Leap. It's his sort of framework. So the 4 zones that he describes are your zone of genius, your zone of excellence, your zone of competence, and your zone of incompetence. Now, as an entrepreneur, as a CEO, we are doing lots of things, especially at the beginning, especially if we don't have a team of people. But even if we do, we're still wearing multiple hats, right? You're doing multiple jobs. And the thing that you're selling is likely your zone of genius work. But all the other stuff that has to happen to make that engine run, to make that business run, you're going to have all of the zones in there, right? What Gay Hendricks says is that, as a professional, he doesn't talk about business owners specifically, but this relates to if you're a business owner too, you want to be spending like 90% of your time in your zone of genius, or at least that should be like the target, right? You may not be right now, right? That's okay. But if we're wearing 6 hats, we need to know we're wearing 6 hats, not just think that's the way it is, right? I tend to have a little bit more flexibility. I think if you're in your zone of genius, zone of excellence, 90% of the time, you're good, right? There's nothing wrong with excellence. When you're in your zone of competence, that's okay as long as you know. But we really, 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 really want to try and avoid being in our zone of incompetence. We've all been there. For me, it's trying to figure out like tech stuff. If it was like, if I had to figure out how to sort of set up an automated nurture sequence in MailChimp and how to tag, people who sign up for my free opt-in and how to hook all of that stuff up. Like that literally would make me want to jump out the window. I can't think of anything I would like to do less. So I hire someone to do that for me. So I don't even try because I could lose days on that and a whole lot of confidence and motivation. Okay. So Here are some prompts. Diana has these where she's going to cut and paste into the chat. So, you can always, I'm not sure if you have the function to do that in this chat, but hopefully you can, copy those prompts from the chat and you can come back to them later if you want to. Okay. So here's how we're going to identify what your zone of genius or zone of excellence activities are. What are you doing when you feel most in your flow? When things are coming easily? Well, they don't have to be coming easily, but you're enjoying the work. Even if it's hard work, you're enjoying it. So for example, me writing something or coming up with a workshop like this, I'm in my flow, even though it's really hard and challenging for me to figure it out. I'm really enjoying myself, right? And I can lose track of time. What do people come to you for? Now, that might not be what you actually do. You may be like, oh, I do this thing over here, but people keep asking me to help them with this thing over here, and I just help them as a favor, or, I just do it for friends and family. But what do people consistently come to you for? Because they're seeing something in you that maybe you're not seeing. And what would you do all day for free? Of course, you won't do it all day for free, but I would talk about business all day for free. I'm doing it right now, right? This is me having a good time, right? So those are things we want to figure out. These are zone of genius activities. Now, conversely, what activities tax your brain and slow you down? Now, one of the things, and we'll just touch on this, with ADHD, the executive function is, what handles the planning, there's working memory, there's task switching, there's all of this stuff going on in that sort of executive function. I like to think of the executive function as the conductor of the orchestra, right? So all of the instruments aren't playing, all of the time, as loud as they can, right? So when there are certain activities that sort of drain the battery faster, right? And once that battery is drained for the day, we sort of have to wait till the next day before we start with a kind of a full battery again, right? So there are certain activities that drain you much faster than other ones, and they slow you down, right? And then the next prompt is, what activities or areas of business of life do you procrastinate on? So it might be that actually you don't mind it once you get going, but it's not something that you're super excited about, right? Because if you were excited and you were interested in it, you probably wouldn't be procrastinating, right? So these are sort of the indicators of where you maybe don't want to be investing too much of your time or energy, and where you may be wanting to either, redirect your business model so it has less of that, or outsource that, right? When I mentioned the whole tech component, for me, that was actually when I hired my virtual assistant for the first time. It was we've been together for years now, but I just had these 6 videos that were a part of a nurture sequence. And I had no idea how to get them on my website, as the freebie, right? And so she dealt with all that, and it still seems like magic to me all these years later, right? So, and that was a big outlay, it was she's my biggest investment every month. So your action item for this section are to brainstorm all the things you do in a day or a week and sort them into zones, right? So you could literally do that cross. Again, I understand that there are different ways people do things. You may have this on your desk, and when you're doing something, you just jot it in there, or you may just do a brain dump and just capture as much as you can in one sitting, and just see where are the zones that you really want to be focusing your attention, so you can design your business to support that. Okay, because here's the beautiful thing about entrepreneurship is you get to design your business. Okay, now I mentioned the group coaching program. It's called the Creative Business Bootcamp. It's over 4 months, and we do a different module each month. And the first module is to identify your unique value proposition. So we go deeper into, how to define what makes you unique and how to articulate it. But this is very much from that sort of what are the activities, right? So this is more of an internal component of that work. And then in the group, we talk more about the external component. How do we talk about that in a way that is appealing to the people that you want to serve, right? Your ideal clients, which brings us nicely into step 2, whom you serve and why. These are your ideal clients, right? So here's another beautiful thing about being an entrepreneur. You get to decide who you work with. Now, you may not have got to the point yet where you really think you do have much choice. It depends on where you are in your business, right? At the beginning of one's business, a lot of times we end up just taking any client that we can because we need to make money. And that is fair. I would say absolutely that's the right approach. Because if you don't have clients, you don't have a business, right? So take all the clients at the beginning. But as you sort of like get into it, if you're years into your business and you're still working with awful clients, where you just don't sort of gel, then this is an opportunity to refine who an ideal client is for you. Okay. And this is not about you sort of trying to shape shift into being the thing that they need. Yes, we always need to be working on ourselves. Of course we do. But not trying to become someone different. We want the people who, to James Clear's quote, respect who we are. Okay. So the way I've broken this down, because again, this is module 2 in the group, this is a big, thing, right? It's one of the fundamental things that we're going to want to figure out in any business. Who am I? Who are they? And what do we have in common, right? So for the purposes of this workshop, we're just going to talk about it through the lens of 2 components. We're going to look at what's shared and what's complementary. Now, I'll go into a little bit more detail here. So, your ideal clients and you. Ideally, we want to have a shared purpose. Now, why is that important? Because for an ADHD brain, if you don't care about something, it's going to be much harder to get the motivation, right? And so you've got to care. All right. So that's a place where you can identify, where do we share purpose? Because then if there are tricky things along the way, the shared purpose is that glue that kind of holds it all together, right? Holds you together with the client, right? Keeps the thing moving forward. So some prompts. What or who do you really care about? So for example, I really care about creatives because I've worked with creatives my entire life. I consider myself a creative, and I also see how so many creative entrepreneurs and freelancers are unnecessarily struggling because no one taught them how to build a better business, how to build a profitable business. So I care deeply about those people, you people, and that's why I've been a coach for 14 years. That's why I've been working with creatives since the late 90s, because I really care, and it never gets old. I never get tired of my clients, right? Some are easier than others. That doesn't matter. I care about them, and I also feel a sense of justice around them. I hate to see a creative being ripped off by a big corporation that pays them on 90 days and, or 120 days, all of this stuff, So these are the things that kind of get me agitated. I care about neurodivergent creatives, which is why I, made that a sort of subspecialty, right? So these are things that are going to kind of keep you motivated, keep you invested, keep you interested, keep you growing, okay? What are you on a mission to change? I'm on a mission to change this idea that being a creative means that you should just get used to being broke, right? I don't think that's true. Excuse me, I've got a cough. So I'm on a mission to change that perception that creatives are no good with money, that they're no good at business, that they're, all of these things. Rubbish. They just need to learn, right? And everything is learnable, okay? So, and the last prompt is, what values do you want your clients to share? We touched on that earlier, right? So there'll be certain people that if they don't share your values, it's going to be hard to sort of gloss over that maybe. Maybe it won't. I don't know. It depends. But why not call it out here? Now, the other part of it is what's complementary. I think that should be E, not an I. Goodness, I'm finding typos all over the place. I'll have to confirm that. Complementary with an E or an I. I'll look into it. So the strengths that your clients and collaborators bring to the table and the strengths that you bring to the table, they should be complementary. It should be the yin and the yang, right? So often we're drawn to people who think and act and process and implement the way we do, when actually the complementary component, as long as there is respect and both people coming together and meeting in the middle and moving something forward, is much more strong, right? That's why neurodiverse teams are actually stronger than, one neurocognitive type, right? Because everyone's going to be bringing different ideas to the table, different ways to do things. So every project needs dreamers and doers. This reference is from Making Ideas Happen by Scott Belsky. It's an old book, but it's great. It's still really relevant, I think. The dreamers are the ideas people, and the doers execute and make the ideas happen. And guess what? If you're a small business owner, you may be both, right? But if you're, I'm so sorry, I've got a frog in my throat. But if you're collaborating, if you're working with a client, it's great to know who's doing what, who hands the baton over when. Because here's the thing. The dreamers think the doers are a Debbie Downer, and the doers think the dreamers are just like away with the fairies and holding everything up, right? So if everybody knows what their role is and when they get to have the baton. So the doers at the beginning, they need to let the dreamers do their thing. They're going to sit on their hands. They're going to let them do their thing. Once the dreamers give it to the doers and say, run with it, they got to let them do it. They can't be like, oh, I've got another idea, or I'm going to change everything. I used to have a creative that I used to work with. And, he was like notorious for halfway through a project being like, ask the client for more money. I want to gold leaf, this thing here. And I'd be like, no, I'm not going to ask them for more money. You said that you would do it this way for this budget, and figure out a way then, buy some gold paint, do whatever. So, knowing who does what is helpful, and seeking those people out. And especially if you're bringing people in to work with you in a small business, try to bring those people in that are complementary, but also understand where they fit in and where their role is. So some prompts to help you with that. What people do you collaborate well with? How do your complementary skills? It's an E. So I think that's the spelling right there. These are the things that hang me up, right? Typos. How do your complementary skills make the outcome better? And is there a pattern or flow that works particularly well? So even if you're thinking about with the complementary skills and how they make that outcome better, that's going to impact everything from the kinds of people that you choose, to the kinds of job descriptions that you write, to the types of clients that you take on, right? You're going to be thinking about that, because in the end, the only thing that really matters is the outcome outstanding? That's all that matters. Clients work with us because they want something and they need something, and our job is to make sure that we exceed expectations, right? So everything should be towards that goal. And then if you find a pattern or a flow that works particularly well, turn that flow into a process, into a procedure. One of the things, and we'll get to this a little bit later, that I think is a bit of a misnomer, or some misunderstanding about folks with ADHD, is that they have no systems. Hooey. I have found that my clients with ADHD have tons of systems. They're really good at systems. Now, are they super polished? Sometimes, sometimes not, because, they needed those systems just to be able to, make it through the day and make sure that everything, they remembered everything, right? And they knew what to do, when and where. So actually, I use with my clients, lots of different tools depending on the person, but one that I have found a lot of people like is Miro, and they'll literally do a workflow because it's visual and it's colorful, and you can build the thing, and as you're building it, it's staying in your mind a little bit longer, right? So if something works well, get it down into a mirror workflow, right? Because then it's a repeatable process. You're not going to have to tax your brain and your executive function every time you do it. I'll give you a good example of this. So I recently introduced a new, I use an app called YNAB, which is You Need a Budget. And I've been using it for personal finances and home finances for a couple of years. And I really liked it. And I thought, gosh, this would be really great to bring this into business, just so I could have more transparency. It was a little bit of a sort of, I had to sort of like jerry rig it to kind of like get it in there and figure out how to make it work for business. But anyway, it kind of added some different steps. The outcome is what I wanted it to do, but it's added a couple of steps. Now, because I only do my bookkeeping every 2 weeks, every time I did my bookkeeping, I had to try and remember what are all of the steps and in what order do I need to do it? Because at one point I have to be in YNAB, and at one point I have to be in my bank account, and at one point I have to be in FreshBooks, and I could never remember. So I literally just wrote it out when I did it one time, turned it into a checklist, and it's in my Google Drive and my standard operating procedures. And now every time I do my bookkeeping, I open up that document, I uncheck all the boxes, and I just go down and I check the boxes as I do the things. I don't have to try and remember how to do it, right? So that's just a little tip there. A few more prompts. What would make the collaborative process easier, more consistent, or more repeatable? Well, we just talked about that a little bit, right? And how might that be communicated, right? Again, if you can turn something to a process or a procedure that you can share with someone, great. Anything where we can reduce friction is always going to A, ease your executive function load, and B, improve outcomes, okay? And on top of that, because it's removing the friction, it's going to be a more pleasant process for everybody as well. Okay, so hopefully you're getting some ideas. And honestly, if you walk away with like one good idea from today that you're going to implement, I call it a win. Okay, so you don't have to do all of these things, but jot down the things and just make a mental note. I'm going to do one thing in the next 48 hours, just one thing. Because the other thing that I've learned about like webinars, having given 1 million of them and having participated in 1 million of them, is that, it's really just taking in information. It's not actually doing anything. It feels like you're doing something, but you're not. You're just taking in information at this point. What you do with the information, that's a whole different story. And for the most part, we don't really need more information. We need like a better strategy to achieve something, to move the ball down the field, okay? So I encourage you to like just circle one thing when you get to the end of this. All right, so we're on step 3. And then we can open this up to, this is the last step, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. All right, so this is how you deliver outstanding results. Again, that is the ultimate goal. That is the reason you're in business, because you deliver outstanding results. So the how of it, right? How do we do that? So again, James Clear, he's also very quotable as well as being very good. He says, you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. Oh my God, like mic drop. If I had come up with a quote like that, I would be so proud of myself, right? So good. Because goals are meant to be aspirational. They're meant to be sort of something that we're shooting for, right? And we may or may not reach. But it's really true. We usually don't rise those, but we will fall to the level of our day-to-day systems, all right? So I love this picture. Karl Lagerfeld at work. Does anybody know what this system is? It has a name. I can't see the chat, so I'm going to let you all think about it, and then I'll chime in a minute. But I don't know if Karl Lagerfeld had ADHD, but if he didn't, I will eat my hat, because this is some kind of a system. It's called the pile system, right? He probably knows exactly where everything is, how to lay something. And clearly, look how relaxed he looks there, right? So clearly this is like not doing his head in, right? It would do my head in, but that's not me. It's not my system, right? So to my point earlier of, one of the, misunderstandings or things people get wrong about folks with ADHD is they have no systems. They do. It just might not be a system that might make sense to another brain wiring, right? So Systems, let's think of a system as a business, and the processes and the people are the cogs within the system. All right, because I think oftentimes, and I'm guilty of this too, system and processes kind of get used interchangeably, right? So the process and the people are kind of the cogs inside of the system. The system is a collection of processes, all right? So a good system or process addresses a very specific challenge or opportunity. This is one of my biggest beefs about people who teach operations. Usually, well, I shouldn't say usually, it's probably generalizing, but I think that operations may very well be taught by someone who is neurotypical, who thinks in a very linear fashion, who processes things, one thing, next thing, next thing, next thing. And, maybe isn't the most creative or innovative of how, things could be changed, right? So a lot of times, and I've had clients, and in fact, a recent member in my group, she had ADHD or has ADHD, and she said that she actually joined a program, about operations and systems, and she said she just became so overwhelmed so quickly by it all, and then just felt worse about herself because she didn't have these systems in place, right? So I'm a big believer that, to Karl Lagerfeld's point, I don't know if anyone ever, there was an exhibition at the Met in New York. I live near New York, about Karl Lagerfeld. And they had these videos with all of his, seamstresses and the people that did the beadwork and, in this couture house. And they said that he would do these, and they had sketches of his, and they looked like these very fashiony sketches, and it had these notes on there that looked like just scribbles, and he would hand them to these, old ladies. And they knew exactly what they said. To them, it was like an architectural blueprint. They knew exactly what he meant. They knew exactly what they were to do from something that looked like a beautiful fashion sketch with some scribbles on it, right? So that is a process. And it worked in a couture fashion house where a lot of money is at stake, right? So I'm a big fan of building the processes that you need. And if they work for you and the people that you work with and your client, the people you work with, meaning people internally or your clients, fine. Doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be anyone else's process or system. Make it work for you. All right. So here are a few challenges and opportunities. So the challenges are, typically I'll be addressing executive function challenges. And then an opportunity might be an idea for a process that you might create, right, to address that challenge, to offset that challenge. So let's say working memory. Having a place where you can capture all your ideas. Now, that sounds like a moment, right? But not a million notebooks. So one of the things that I use with my clients, and as a template I share with them, it's a Notion dashboard. And it's basically where you can capture, there's a space where you can capture ideas, and there's a space where you can put projects, and it's all visual, and you can move things around, and you can create sections that work for you. So you can take away or you can add things that work. But so that's a place where if you just have one dashboard, it can link out to everything. It can link out to Dropbox. It can link out to Google Drive. It can link out to all the places you need it to. But it's one place where you can look at everything in one place, right? And then there's a section for ideas. You're not ready to do anything with it yet, but you can just make a note in there. It opens up into a page. You throw the ideas in there, and then you just park them, right? So finding some kind, and of course, everybody, that dashboard works for a lot of folks, but not for everybody. But finding your version of the Notion dashboard is great. How can you capture all your ideas so they're not on backs of envelopes or in a pile, or in a million notebooks? Okay. Time management. Who's time blind here? I definitely have one of those folks in my household, and I've got a time timer over here. I don't know how many people use those. The visual time timers, fantastic. But you could use a time timer. Planning and mapping out things in a visual timeline, putting it on the wall, making it visible, right? One of the things I've noticed, just even in my own household, is if it's, but certainly with my clients too, is if it's not visible, it doesn't exist, right? If you can't see it, it's gone, right? So And that's the way, if you can see time, obviously, and then your clocks everywhere, right? Where my husband's got an enormous clock in front of, on the wall in front of his desk. Getting started. Dopamine and energy management. Now, this is an interesting thing because, I mean, obviously there's medication that supports like the dopamine, uptake and production, but there's also other ways in which you can manage that. So, for example, there's actually a fantastic couple of episodes on the Huberman Lab. I'm Andrew Huberman, and one of them is about dopamine and one of them is about ADHD. But even what he talks about, so I see my kid do this a lot of times. I'll go downstairs to the basement and he's playing video games and he has the TV on at the same time. What that does is it raises the baseline of the stimulus that is needed to get the dopamine, right? So if you remove one of them, our rule is like one screen at a time. So if you remove one of them, the baseline lowers of how much stimulation is needed just to get the dopamine going, right? So there are things that we can do that can manage that and optimize it, right? When we understand, and what I like about his podcast is he really explains like how it works. It's not at all from a touchy-feely place. It's really from a sort of like neuroscience, and this is what happens when this happens. Task switching, if that's a challenge, time blocking, setting alarms, right? Just a couple of ideas. Obviously, none of these are exhaustive lists. Getting distracted, having time and space to do nothing. And why I put nothing in, air quotes there and quotes is because obviously you're not doing nothing. You're thinking, you're processing, right? It may look like you're looking out of the window, but you're not. But like, if there's not enough of that time for that to happen, you're going to keep getting distracted, right? So sometimes you just need to have that time built in, not try to keep producing, because that's not what your brain's good at, right? Like constantly going. Overwhelm, building capacity and support. So what I mean by that is in any business, like you can max out your capacity very quickly. And a lot of that is to do with like your business model, your pricing. Speaking of pricing, if you want to go to my website, there's a free download on pricing creativity. And in that, I talk about building capacity. So just go to JustineClay.com. You'll see at the top, there's a free download. You just have to opt in. And it's a really great in-depth guide on pricing and creativity. But we talk about that there. Because if you have the kind of business model where your pricing is lower and you need to do lots of projects, your capacity is like shot, right? Then you get into that overwhelm space. Support, obviously, right? Prioritization. Mind mapping and creating goals and actions, right? So it could be like, you brain dump all of the things that you want and need to do in a certain time frame. And this is a process I often do with my clients. It's something we do together. And, they'll talk and I'll organize, right? So it's like, the neurotypical brain, complementing the neurodivergent brain. They're talking, I'm typing and organizing it and putting it all in the right places. And then they have a punch list, right? Not the right places in the place that works for them. And then they have a punch list. They can literally check the things off. And so when they feel overwhelmed, they can pull out that list and they can just pick something off the list and do it, right? And boredom, which is a big one, right? Make things interesting for yourself, right? Like that, only you know what that looks like. But if bookkeeping is super boring to you, how could you make it interesting? Could it be something you need to do body doubling? Maybe do body doubling with a friend. Maybe it's something where you have like a reward afterwards. Like that. Just what could you do to, stave off the boredom, which oftentimes is like connected with a procrastination, right? So, last prompts, I think. What parts of your business or your life currently feel most chaotic? If these parts felt easy, streamlined, and successful, what would that look like? And what support would you need to make that happen? Now, remember when I said do one thing in the next 48 hours, 48 hours, right? And if you're working harder than anyone else, yet you still fall behind. And let me tell you, no one is working harder than an ADHD person. No one. organizing your time and staying on task and managing your business, it feels like a struggle, and you want to make your business more profitable, efficient, I would love to help. As I mentioned, I do have my Creative Business Bootcamp. I run it twice a year. I run it in January and I run it in September. The next cohort is only 16 people max. So it's really a nice intimate group. It's beautiful. And it starts in September. All right. So we're accepting applications. So you can go to the link, which Diana is going to put in to the chat, but it's justineclay.com/bootcamp. Or you can just go to justineclay.com and you'll find it there as well. Okay, so I want to thank you all so much. I'm going to stop sharing and go back to, okay, all right, so I've stopped sharing. And yes.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. Just adding that bootcamp link into the comments. I'm with you on the frog in the throat, so give me a second.
Oh, I know. It's like always a way, isn't it?
Okay. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I really loved especially those challenges and opportunities at the end. So everybody can kind of like hone in, like you said, on like one thing to start, like one challenge and one opportunity to like tackle this week. Absolutely love that. So yeah, so everybody, the prompts are all in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and also put them in just one comment really quickly, because like, why not? Just going to put them all in one place. In case anybody wants to copy those. And then we can see what kind of questions we have. Okay, somebody's saying they're not seeing the comments. So inside of Facebook, yeah, they should show up on the side of the video or the bottom. Okay, so let's see. Let me see if I can find, there was a question that I wanted to find. Oh, what type of workflow? Somebody was asking what type of workflow. I think when you were talking about, yeah, is there a pattern or flow that works particularly well? Maybe Jessica, you can clarify what that question is. I think it was like at a specific moment. I don't know if that jogs any thoughts for you, Justine.
I'm on a call. Okay. Sorry, my kid just came in.
Summer break, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if that jogs any memories for you.
Can you read the question for me again?
It was just what type of workflow?
Oh, okay. So, well, a workflow can be for anything, right? So let's say, or any process. So let's say you realize that maybe you're not closing sales, right? So you may decide, okay, what is my sales process? And you can say, okay, well, first I do this. Like first they land on this page on my website, and then they go here. And so it's basically like, and then this happens, right? And so you if you use Miro, it's just a very visual, but you could literally use it with Post-its on a wall, right? And you just say like, what happens next? And then underneath each of those actions, there'll be probably a bunch of other things that then have to happen as well. So once you can see it visually, you can start to see where you can remove steps or optimize or outsource. So a lot of times when I did this and I visualized it, I was just like, oh gosh, there's like 12 things that have to happen manually, or let's say 4 things that have to happen manually with my assistant once someone does this thing. But if I just made one tweak to my onboarding PDF, she no longer had to do that because it was now no longer personalized. It was just a general PDF that we could send to everybody. Right. So that's what I mean by like those workflows. And you could use it for anything. It's just literally like this happens and then this happens and then this happens and then this happens. And then you just look for where can you remove steps or streamline things so there's not so much back and forth, which is so difficult for the ADHD brain. Right. Does that make sense? Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Miro. Yes. Miro is one. Other people use Figma. But like I say, you could literally just do Post-its on a thing. I think a lot of times we also get really caught up in the apps and everything else. And then we've got a million apps that we're trying to track. Sometimes just like a whiteboard and a series of Post-its is plenty.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Because yeah, we did get a question that was asking about apps or software to help with planning or mapping. So I think, yeah, you were talking about Canva, Figma, Miro. I think Milanote is another cool one for creatives. Have you ever tried that one?
I have not tried it, but I do have a client that really likes that.
Yeah, I played around with that a little bit. It's pretty fun.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Jen asked, she says, I'm familiar with your studies references. I've done a lot of self-awareness work. Please explain how you work with clients individually. What I would say is go to my website because it's really self-explanatory there. If you go to JustineClay.com, just so I don't, take up the time with other folks. And then it'll explain the different services. And then if you want to chat, just go to the contact page, fill out the questionnaire, and then we could just hop on a call.
JustineClay.com. Yep, just popping that in the chat, JustineClay.com. Let's see, any other questions about today's content or software, anything? Okay, yeah, with the September program. So the group program that you were mentioning, that's your September program.
That's the September program. It starts at on the 9th, which I think is the 9th. It's a Tuesday. It's from 12 to 1:30 Eastern Standard Time. So Michelle says, what if we're new to business? Should we have a certain amount of business or years under our belt before working with you? That's a great question. I tend to work with people who have been in business for 5 years or more, or been doing what they're doing 5 years or more. So they can be brand new to business, but not brand new to the work they're doing and their business, right? Because it's a lot of times you just need to sort of know what's not working, have experience with what's not working, almost to tweak it, I think, or just with me anyway.
Mm-hmm. Like maybe somebody was in-house and then they're
going
out on their own.
Yeah. Or they've been doing it for just a really long time, sort of like, sort of winging it. I think I always say, like, you can get a pretty long way winging it, but then at a certain point you're like, this is not working. This is not sustainable. Like, I need to do things differently. So that's also kind of a perfect time.
Let's see. Was that under zone of excellence? Oh, when you said define what makes you unique and how do you talk about it as appealing to your clients, was that under zone of excellence?
No, that's just something that's going to be a business principle. The zone of excellence is really more about the things that you do when you're in your flow, right? So, for example, some people may just be in their flow, just like diving into a spreadsheet and organizing numbers and doing that. That's a zone of excellence work for them. Someone else might be in their zone of excellence, ideating and coming up with layups and concepts and things like that, right? So that's really what I mean by the zone of excellence.
Yeah.
Deborah says, I make great systems and processes and then forget to use them. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I totally get that. And that's why it's actually really great. One of the things that I invested in my business like a couple of years ago was working with an operations person. And, one of the things that we built was a knowledge base, which was basically just one page in Notion that says, okay, this is the operations, this is the tools that we use, this is the, whatever. And we have just like the key parts in there by section. And then so you can just go to one place and then that will link out to where you need to go as well. So I'm a big fan of like an HQ, like one place where you can go look, and then that will link out to all of the different things. You'd have to remember them all.
I love that. And then Lauren says, I get sucked into making my process look pretty and formatted great and never use my templates.
You know what? I think that's just, it's a feature, not a bug. I think these are one of the things where we just have to like accept these things about ourselves and just be like that. It's such an ADHD thing. And I think it's just one of those things which is like, this is what I do, right? I do make it pretty. That's part of it. Everything is going to be color coded. I'm going to have all my binder things and I'm going to make it look beautiful. And, some things will stick and some things won't, right? So I say embrace the prettiness.
Yeah.
That's funny. Jessica says, and then you're late because you're so busy beautifying your templates. I get it, and I think that's something that like I certainly do as well. I get really sucked into like making my slides pretty and all of that kind of stuff. I could probably spend way less time on my presentations than I do, but that's the fun part of the work too, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Well, looks like we are kind of rounded up here. I guess the only thing I wanted to ask, like as a follow-up, is like if somebody is struggling with, okay, I'm making things like overly look pretty and then I'm not using it, or I'm just going too long. Like how much do like you have to put rules on what you're doing, or like does self-control work, or sometimes is it better to like, yeah, let yourself go on?
I mean, I think it depends on how much is it giving you joy to do it, and then maybe it's just that there is a time limit. It's like, okay, I can only mess around with this for like half an hour. I give myself half an hour to go for glory, to like do all the highlighters and everything else, but I'm just gonna like, I'll time box it,
Put on a
right?
timer. That's smart.
Yeah, I think it's just like, because I think for a lot of us, like that there's a lot of joy in these components of it as well. So don't try be completely someone you're not, but just how long can you look for a perfect day? Yeah, I mean, and for me too, it's like, I actually took myself off of Instagram. Like I post and ghost now. I had to take it off my phone because it was such a diversion for me, and I would go on all those rabbit warrens, and suddenly I'm looking for the perfect, blue sweater that I saw some woman wearing it. Like, that's kind of the world that we're living in now that is really, really difficult as well. So yes. There is sometimes we just have to like remove. That's nothing that James Clear talks about in his book, is like designing your environment and your life to sort of remove some of these things as well.
Yeah, love that. Love that. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Justine, for delivering such a special and important topic, and something that we haven't covered that I know is so common in the interior design space. Like you said, that creativity and the neurodivergence goes hand in hand. I know that one well. So it's great. Yeah, those ideas, they just keep coming. And so it's really nice to get these structured ways. And like I said, that challenge opportunity. So thank you very, very much for
my pleasure.
Being with us today. And Megan, last thing is, what book did you just say? I think we're just talking about the Atomic Habits.
Yeah, Atomic Habits by James Clear.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.